I brought up Albion before. Albion Correctional Facility is a plane flight away from New York City. What's grandma going to do? Right? And grandma's going to put the kids, and the kids are, likely to have some sort of stuff going on because mom is away, all this stuff happening. It's just for the children. It is far, far, far more difficult when mom goes away.
Okay. So, do you think we're doing criminal justice right?
Absolutely not. No, it is. Our criminal justice system is a complete and utter failure to the people who are incarcerated within it, frankly, to the workers who are working within it, to our communities, to our families.
Talk about
everything.
The workers. Talk about because we don't hear about that part of it.
Yeah, correctional officers have a very difficult job because we have set up a system that traumatizes basically everyone. It dehumanizes the people who are incarcerated there, and it encourages the people who work there to dehumanize the people there. It's not that it's an easy job, but I have students who want to go into be COs, who want to be police officers. Most of my students want to work within the criminal justice system. So I'm not going to call anybody monsters or anything like that. That's not what I'm interested in. But I think it's failing them as well, especially when we're talking about private prisons where people are making, where there's less training, less preparation, and therefore more trauma, both for the people who are incarcerated, more for the female people who are incarcerated, trust me. But, correctional officers, police officers, people who work in the system are far more likely to be involved in domestic violence, to commit suicide, to engage in drug and alcohol behaviors, mental health problems, because the jobs are very, very difficult. And because it's set up in a way that nobody should be in a situation where they're dehumanizing someone else.
Yeah.
It doesn't serve anyone.
Yeah. Okay, go on with the rest of the what do you think is wrong? What's going wrong? And well, because we talked to a lot of people on this show, from all, from the political places, from the frontline services, from people who have been incarcerated. Everybody has a piece of this pie. But we rarely hear from the academic world about and who looks at this from a lot of vantage places, a lot of vantage points, statistical, human, all those kinds of things. So talk a little bit more about where you see where you see us.
So, one of the things that I like to do is think about how we can imagine a world without incarceration, or a world where we've reduced incarceration dramatically, especially in the United States, which is, as you well know, the world's leading incarcerator, far and away. So, when I think about women, if we're working within the system, I try to think about it in two ways: either that we're working within the system, or that we're working without a system and a completely different system. So within the system, I like to think about gender responsive programming. So, one of the things that we aren't doing right, and let's flip that, right, from recidivism to desistance, let's flip it to what we could be doing right and what we are doing right in some places. Gender responsive programming acknowledges that gender makes a difference, and that we have to respond to women's needs and strengths differently than we do for men. And within the criminal justice system, and also in reentry, which obviously is a piece of that, we have to make it so that women's needs are addressed differently. Trauma, for example, women are far more likely to have experienced trauma as children than men. Sexual trauma in particular, they're more likely to have primary caretaking responsibilities for children. All of those things, making sure that gender makes a difference. Also, one of the things that I think we're doing wrong and that we could do better is that we really dichotomize victims and, I'll say this, I don't use this word, but victims and criminals. People that they are two different things, two categories. One is good and one is bad. And the Survived and Punished Project, for example, talks about this idea of no perfect victim. And to me, what that means is that we have to mesh together our idea of victim and criminal, if you will, right? That is the same person, that all of these, basically all of the women that we're talking about, men too, but my focus is on women and on mothers. All of the people that are incarcerated are people who have experienced, almost all, are people who've experienced trauma, who've experienced domestic violence, who've experienced sexual violence, all of these different things that have gone on in their lives. And one of the things that Mariame Kaba talks about in the part of the Survived and Punished program is the trauma to prison pipeline. We talk about the school to prison pipeline, but they, in Survives and Punished, they talk about the trauma to prison pipeline and pathways theory, which talks about that we criminalize girls' survival strategies. so that we take our girls who are most victimized when they are young, and when they try to survive and they try to get out, so they run away from home or they're truant from school, all these things, what are those? They're status offenses. So boom, you're involved in the juvenile justice system. And then how do you deal with that? Well, they're sending you back home, or you're either you end up in
so
some
you think we can disrupt that pipeline at that point of entry right there?
Absolutely. Recognizing that instead of looking at it as just these are bad kids, look at them as kids who are trying to survive in very, very difficult situations, and that we right now what we choose to do is punish those survival strategies, and what we could be doing is noticing those survival strategies, empowering girls to survive in these
and
very
redirect
difficult...
that energy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Put in places at that entry point that can turn the tides a little bit,
right?
So that they're not use those skills. They can use those skills in other ways,
right?
Because they're good skills.
Absolutely,
right? They're good skills.
Yeah.
They're instinctive. They are. They're. They hone them over a period of time.
Yes.
So they're good skills.
Yes, they
just have to redirect them away from
and protect them. And protect them. There are children.
Yes.
Yes. There are children. Engaging in sex work, for example. All of a sudden we look at them as prostitutes. But wait a second. If it were any other person, it would be statutory rape. So how?
Because kids can't consent to sex.
That's right. That's right. But if we look at them as hoes, then they're bad kids.
Yeah.
But wait a second. But they're still kids.
So that's a whole other. So now to change, that's a whole other component to change mindset and language.
Yeah.
And perception. I mean, that's some other work right there, right?
It is. Yeah, well, person first language, it isn't useful in every single situation. But when it comes to people in the criminal justice system, I feel very, very strongly about using person first language as incarcerated people or people involved in the criminal justice system. Because, instead of perps or inmates, that's just language that I don't use. And it's language that I make sure that my students don't use.
So what do you think should happen to women when they come out of prison? Like what kind of supportive things have you seen work? Or what would you imagine could work?
So let me start that off by rewinding it a tiny bit. I don't think, in the vast majority of cases, I don't think that women should be incarcerated at all. I think that most of the women that we are talking about in our criminal justice system can be in the community. It is cheaper. It is more effective. It's better off for their kids, better off for their families, better off for them. It just works better.
So who could hear that message? Because that's a different message than... Like in an election year, that is not the message.
Well, I have to tell you, the Progressive Caucus in Connecticut is starting to think about stuff like that. I'm engaging with Josh Elliott, who's a state rep.
Yeah, he's a good
in
guy.
Hamden. Yeah, and he really wants to push the envelope when it comes to criminal justice. And obviously Robin Porter, Gary Winfield, we live in a place, I came from New York City, and it was really kind of cool to then come here and realize that, wait a second, there's some seriously progressive work that's going on in Connecticut on this stuff. So I've been trying to work on some model legislation, some sort of planned legislation to do things like this. So how do we reduce our incarceration here in Connecticut? Obviously, we've been doing it for juveniles. How can we do it for adults? It's so much cheaper. If you're worried, if you're a taxpayer and you're worried about money, it's so much cheaper. It is so much
Texas
more effective.
Figured that out.
Well, it's the most conservative. What's so interesting about it is the most conservative states are the ones that had to do it.
Because they couldn't afford it.
They couldn't afford it anymore. And the Vera Institute of Justice was doing incredible work in the most conservative of states because they were like, what did we do? Here we are spending billions upon billions of dollars doing something that's not working at all. That's, our recidivism rate is astronomical. So why are we going to keep spending money doing things that don't work? So here in Connecticut, how can we push the envelope? How can we end cash bail, for example? How can we make it so that phone calls are free?
That cash bail thing, I think, is the next frontier of this.
I think so.
Hyper mass incarceration fight.
Yep.
Because when people find out, when you put the light of day on how much it costs, I mean, that's a crime.
Yes. Well, and that it is so completely different by socioeconomic status.
Yes.
That it's just a plain old caste system. And that people who can afford it can get out and can keep their jobs and keep their apartments and keep their homes and keep their relationships with their families. But then people who can't afford it can't do those things. I mean, come on, that's not even democratic.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. So, yeah, all sorts of things that I think we can do. specialized courts are other options. I'm working on an evaluation with my colleague Christopher Salvatore at Montclair State, evaluating a reentry court in Newark. So
it would only handle reentry stuff. Cases.
Yeah, it's people who are coming out of multiple stays. These are people who have tried to reenter multiple times and really need some help. And it's wraparound services. The judges are incredibly involved. I mean, the guys that I've talked to, it is mostly men in these reentry courts, basically because our criminal justice system is mostly men. But the judge will call FedEx and say, hey, I've got somebody who needs a job. Can you, help this guy get a job? And then they can get a job in FedEx. They can get housing. They can do all these things. And they're people who've been in the system for so long, going through this revolving door so many times. And then here they are. Finally, somebody actually gives a damn, right? They actually care. And somebody as powerful as a judge. And that can make a real difference. And then one of the things that I talk about in the book is trying to just, we have veterans courts, we have drug courts, we have family treatment courts, we have prostitution courts, all these different kinds. What about moms courts, right? If we've got a veterans court that talks about, and that was an idea that I worked up with my colleague Francesca LaGuardia also at Montclair, this idea of if you've got a veterans court, where everybody who's in that courtroom, or most people in that courtroom, have been in the military and understand how all that works and how to engage with people and what they need and PTSD, all these things, then why wouldn't you have a mom's court where everybody understands what does it mean to be a mom? And what does it mean to be a mom who has kids and has done something to get them in trouble with the law? What do you do about that? And how can we serve moms better to keep them out of incarceration, to keep their kids with their moms where it's safe, obviously?
Now, there's one thing that I'm very interested in hearing you talk about, because when I came out of federal prison camp, I had to go to my probation officer, my federal probation officer, and it would be at this ridiculous time.
You couldn't be late,
but you can't be late. But I'm also required to have a job. I had some grace around that because then
you're lucky.
I did. I had some grace around that because I didn't work. And then when I finally did work, I worked like a little part-time job. So a friend of mine owned a bookstore, and she let me run it for her.
Good.
And so that satisfied some of that.
That's social capital. Yeah.
Yes. But listen, these appointments in the middle of people's work lives, and they want you to come and then go to work, and then these jobs don't allow for...
And they don't pay you anything.
They don't pay you anything, but they don't allow for the time.
That's right.
And
how are you going to get there if you don't have a car? And the bus is late.
And from what I saw at the federal level, you don't have like a dedicated appointment. You just show up and you try to show up. There's like between 9 and 11. And it's like a gazillion people. Right? And you get into this little room and you're waiting and waiting for your turn to go.
And you got to get back to work.
And you got to get back to work.
And who's got your kids? And what do you, No, it's a setup to fail. Is what it is.
And I just found that to be so spirit breaking. And I see these people in these waiting rooms just frustrated. Like, okay.
And the POs too. It's not like the POs are happy.
No. And they're right. Like nobody's happy.
Nobody's happy.
This is not working.
It's not working. The whole system is just busted, and having all these responsibilities. Some of the research that I did when I was at the Women's Prison Association is, how women would end up coping with that? They'd just stay home. They'd lock themselves in their room and they would just stay home. And then they would leave really, really, really early for appointments just because, I was in New York City, but what if the Metro card doesn't work? What if the subway isn't running? You got to leave they would leave themselves absolutely ridiculous amounts of time to get there because they were so terrified of being late. Because what happens if you violate? Back in. And then you lose what? You lose your place to stay. You lose all these different things. It's ridiculous. It absolutely does not lend to setting your life up back again for not just living, but thriving. I think about Vivian Nixon and this College and Community Fellowship in New York City. I mean, this is a woman who advocates thriving after incarceration. And why shouldn't women and men, right? But why shouldn't people be able to be thriving? Getting PhDs or getting, or not, just doing something that makes you happy.
Yes. It's just the system is designed for you to serve time in and out of jail.
It is.
You're just still serving time because you can't ever. But I saw that little piece in your bio and I thought, gosh, that no one talks about that part of it. And if you have to see your probation officer twice a week, because some people have to see them twice a week.
And if they call you to drop urine, you got to go.
Oh, I know. And I'm like, how do you explain that to? And if you're at a job where it's minimum wage already, they don't have any tolerance for, I gotta go, I'm late,
Right, but you're also terrified that you're not going to be able to get another job because the stigma associated with being incarcerated and having a history of incarceration, who's going to hire you?
Yeah.
And women who are involved in incarceration are even less likely than their male counterparts to have a GED or to have technical training of some sort. They don't have the skills that are going to get them jobs that, either earn them a living wage or that make them, happy. So, I spoke to, for my project, I interviewed 100 women, 100 moms about their lives after incarceration, and I had a number of women, saying to me, really? I'm making enough money to get to McDonald's, to work at McDonald's and leave McDonald's, and then I'm left with no more money because I just spent it all on getting to work.
Yeah.
And really, but this is what probation wants me. This is what parole wants me to do. It just makes absolutely no sense. But even if you're not on parole, right? Even if you max out, then what happens? You're still in a situation where you're stigmatized for having been incarcerated, where your kids are question mark. Where are they? Are they with you? If they're with you, then you have to do all this management. I'm a mom, and I know what it's like to have to manage without a history of incarceration, with a flexible job. It's really, really hard. Add on all of these layers. Of course, women are going back in because, of course, they want to get high. Like, who wouldn't want to get high? It's so stressful, and going back into old patterns and trying to make money instead of, making this minimum wage at McDonald's. Like, wouldn't you want to make more money? Your kids want shoes. Your kids need shoes. Your kids, want to give them swimming lessons or something. I don't know. You want to be able to pay for the cable. You want to be able to pay for the lights to be on.
So how do you frame this out for people that make the decisions about what needs to happen?
It depends on their priorities. The thing that's so interesting about this is that the solutions work for basically everybody. It's simply that they are not popular because it doesn't click with our law and order, if you will, society. I talk about carceral feminism. I am an anti-carceral feminist, which means that I believe that being a feminist means that we do not have prisons. There are carceral feminists who believe, for example, the Violence Against Women Act, that being a feminist means more punishment, especially of violence against women. But it doesn't work. And this is the thing that I try to really impress upon my students and on anybody that I talk to basically all the time, is that you may feel like something is just because it involves punishment for something that someone did wrong. But if it doesn't work, then why do it? If you're just satisfying your sort of visceral need to punish somebody, but all it does is make crime and suffering more likely later, then it doesn't make any sense. And it's expensive. Right?
I think that's what we see I think that's what people want. We're trained to want some kind of punishment for everything, right?
Yeah, like that's America.
If you steal a paperclip, I want you to go to jail for 100 years.
Yes, right, right. If you do anything, we want to punish you for long, long periods of time.
Yeah.
The question is, does it work? And the answer is no. But almost everyone, it's pretty not unanimous. There are some people in pretty high up positions of power in this country right now, unfortunately. But most people understand that it doesn't work, that what we're doing doesn't work for anybody.
And explain the work part. Like, what does it mean when you say it doesn't work?
So that's a good question. So it doesn't work because recidivism rates are astronomical. People who, you're going into a correctional institution, except nothing is being corrected. When people come out, they are most likely to go back inside once they have come out, because our systems are set up in such a way that they can't find housing. They can't get a job that earns them a living wage. What you were talking about with parole, right? Violating is so easy. It's so easy to violate. You're a little bit late for your appointment, or you forgot to get this slip from your job, or whatever it is, and you're going back inside. So we're just setting it up so that people are going back inside, and it's more expensive. And the more time, because incarcerating people is not cheap. It's incredibly expensive.
It's not. Listen, I was sitting in my federal probation officer, and they have on the wall, he had on his office wall how much it costs to do his job, to watch over me or whatever, to parole me or whatever. It was outrageous. I was like, what?
Well, incarcerating people in jails is, it averages out, it's different state by state, but it's around $100,000 per person per year.
That was more than my whole entire collegiate training and grad school.
Yeah, thanks.
Like that's more than I paid for any of all of that.
Right. I tell my students, wouldn't you like it if somebody paid $100,000 per person in this room per year? For what? And then jail is or prison is less expensive, but still it's to the tune of $60,000 per person per year. To do what? To have them go back inside and cost. It's not like they're paying taxes, right? It's not like they have jobs where they're paid taxes. Not at all. The only way that they're making any money is for corporations like JPay, for example, that makes money off of them making phone calls or sending emails or all of these different things.
Or the jobs that they have inside for pennies on the dollar.
Right. And in Connecticut, we don't have a situation where corporations can employ incarcerated people, but there are other states where they can employ incarcerated people. Victoria's Secret, for example. Out in California, we've got incarcerated people fighting fires. So firefighters who are getting paid they get paid a little bit more, but not by much. So here they are, but that's not. But
could they have those jobs when they get out?
Well, that's the crazy thing about it.
It's you can fight the fires while you're in prison,
right?
But when you get out,
no,
we don't have a job for you.
Yeah, that's why they used to train people to be barbers in prison, but then you get out and you can't have you can't have a job with scissors, you can't get the license
because you can't get the.
It makes absolutely no sense. So it's just, unfortunately, it is about an entire overhaul of a system.
Yes, because it doesn't look like the prison complex system is connected to the real world.
No. Not at all.
It's not correcting and it's not preparing.
That's right.
It's just housing.
Yeah. Now there are organizations, obviously there are incredible organizations like WPA, for example, that are going into the prison facilities and the jail facilities and doing transitional planning. You're sitting with people before they get out and saying, okay, what do you need? And it's simple things that nobody would really think of. It's making sure you have a driver's license. Like when you get out, really? You're going to go to DMV? How's that going to work for you? So how do you set up your health insurance cards, your driver's license, or your some sort of picture ID? How do you make sure that if you have medications that you're getting while you're incarcerated,
and all those things take time,
absolutely,
and transportation,
and frankly, they take confidence.
Yeah,
they take feeling as though you can walk in somewhere and say, "Hey, listen, this is what I need." And once you've been incarcerated, that's not something that's been cultivated. So having somebody that's going to be there to say, okay, let's set this up before you get out, and then let's set up an appointment, let's set up a place for you to go, all these things, it can be life-changing. But again, let me just say again, transitional planning is fantastic, but really it makes us feel better about caging people when really we shouldn't be caging people nearly as much as we are.
I like the way you say that, caging people, because that's really what we're doing.
Yeah.
Ooh. Boy, if you put that out there in people's minds, then they're forced to deal with that.
Yes.
Right? I mean, you're forced to deal with, because then you can't look at, you can't look away.
Yes.
It's like, okay, this is what we're doing.
And we are not only just caging people, we are caging Black and brown people, right? We absolutely, completely, one of the most obvious things about our criminal justice system is that it is overwhelmingly Black and brown. Not necessarily, when you look at usage of drugs, for example, the usage rates are not different by race, but who's incarcerated for it? Black and brown people. So not just we're caging people, but we're caging our Black and brown brothers and sisters in ways that makes absolutely no sense when it comes to justice. Criminal justice system, it should not. A lot of people, I think about my colleague, Dr. Jean Flavin at Fordham, she talks about the criminal punishment system, not the criminal justice system, because right now we're not meting out any type of justice.
No, I think you're right, and I'm loving this conversation, every bit of it. If you just tuned in, I'm talking to Venice Michalsen, the Associate Professor of Justice Studies at Montclair State University in New Jersey, and we're having a rich conversation here on 103.5 WNHH, Criminal Justice Insider with BABZ, RAWLS-IVY, and Jeff Grant, and we are happily sponsored by the Community Foundation of Greater New Haven, now more than ever. So yes, back to it. I gotta take the breaks every now and again.
No, you gotta do it. It's fine.
Pay the bills.
Go for it.
So, what do you want to see happen? If you could have everything that you want in this criminal justice landscape, what would be the first thing want and put in place?
Oh, gosh.
I know. It's like, Babs, I can't dream. I'm in the reality of things.
Well, again, it's sort of bifurcated in my mind. It's this question of like, am I working within the system? If I'm working within the system, we're talking about gender responsive programming. We're talking about transitional programming so that people are coming out, with a plan. It's about making sure that, moms and their families and their kids can have contact while they're incarcerated, facilitating those letters, those phone calls, those visits, making it so that visits aren't so traumatic, expanding prison nursery programs, for example, all of these things that are, programs inside that humanize I think about Dr. Kim Kalika, who does Puppies Behind Bars programs, where women can train seeing eye dogs, all these things, programs inside to help women deal with trauma while they are inside. Eve Ensler did some incredible work. There's all sorts of people doing small, unfunded, right? Not thankless, but just nobody is giving money to these programs that improves women's lives while they are incarcerated and then once they get out. So that's within the system. That's working within the system. If I think about breaking up that system, right? Like trying to loosen ourselves from the idea that our prison system is set, that it is the way we do things. And frankly, the United States is exporting this all over the world. All over the world, prison systems are increasing. They are following our lead as they should not be. It is a mistake to follow our lead. So then how do we imagine ourselves loosening from this, criminal punishment system and imagining something completely different? I think about the imagining alternatives to policing. How would we, instead of having law enforcement officers dispatched to, for example, domestic violence cases or overdose cases or somebody sleeping on a park bench, who else could we have to do that? Social workers or crisis intervention teams sort of are these pre-booking diversion programs. So instead of criminalizing immediately, how do we bring in people that would help? Get somebody sober, get somebody, somebody who's engaged, who's suffering from domestic violence. Instead of sending a law enforcement officer, who could you send? You send somebody else who knows how to get somebody a safety plan, knows how to get someone to a safe place, knows how to find out, okay, what's going on with your money, what's going on with family members that you can go to, right? So how do we break that up? Not incarcerating people for drug offenses. Just don't do it. Why are we doing it? It doesn't make any sense.
So talk a little bit, Venice, about public safety.
Yeah.
Like what do we need to do for people to understand or feel safer? Because that seems to go hand in hand with this whole conversation. Because people will say, well, drugs are dangerous. People who do drugs break into cars, they steal toasters,
which is true.
Microwaves and blah.
Substance abuse, because substance
and I'm
abuse,
afraid.
Yeah, well, because it's an illness. It's an addiction and it's an illness. And if we start approaching it as a public health problem rather than a criminal problem, criminal justice problem, then we would be a whole lot better off. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, people are so concerned about safety. But what's frustrating to me is that the way that we whip up these moral panics about safety, when really, we encourage people to be afraid of strangers on the street pulling us into dark alleys. But who's most likely to victimize us?
People you know.
People who live in your homes. People who, parents, it's more likely to be males. But it also, females are most likely to be victimized in terms of intimate partner violence and childhood abuse, but males are also likely to be victimized and also not talk about it. They're less likely to talk about it. So instead of focusing on fear of this unknown stranger danger, focus on, I'm a college professor, focus on date rape.
Yeah.
Focus on the fact that your acquaintances, your friends, your boyfriends, your boyfriend, even your significant other, these are the people who are most likely to victimize you. And that we don't teach, not only do we not teach our girls how to respond to that, but we also don't teach our boys about consent. We need to talk about positive consent. Do you want to do this? I would like to do this with you. Yes, I would like to do this with you too. Okay, move on. It's not just no means no, it's also yes means yes. So how do we learn to talk about what's actually are risks. You know, you brought up human trafficking.
Yes.
I teach human trafficking, and everybody talks about Taken and Liam Neeson, and everybody's like, oh, well, if I go to Paris, somebody's going to snatch me off the street. No, that's not the reality.
No, somebody's going to snatch you off the streets in Atlanta or here. I mean, you know
Possibly.
what I mean? Like,
but you know who's most likely to be a victim of human trafficking is people from countries that are war-torn, that have dealt with climate change, so they can't any longer farm the fields that they used to farm, or people, you know, coming from countries where there's so much strife. It's poor people who are desperate, not some, you know, rich chick who's going to Paris and somebody snatches her off the street. It's people who are desperate and who feel like they have no other options, and they started out as people who are being smuggled and they end up being trafficked. So really it's about, if you're going to be afraid, don't be afraid of the stuff that's not going to happen to you, because all that does is give politicians a reason to make laws that have nothing to do with the reality of crime in our country and in our world.
That's a good point. That is a good point. I could talk to you for hours.
I could talk to you too.
I'm
so thrilled to meet you. I'm a little starstruck, if I'm being honest.
I don't know why, because you got it going on. I'm enjoying this conversation. And I'm seeing people texting me talking about, ooh, they loving it. So yeah. So let's get back to women, mothers, yes. and their needs around what happens to them. Because we've seen a lot of mothers, at least I did when I was in Danbury, and it was so many women who couldn't read.
Yeah.
It was stunning to
me. And therefore can't write letters. And can't read letters. Yeah.
So you know what I did?
What'd you do?
Because when I got in there, I was like, oh God, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
And somebody came up to me and was like, I hear you can read. And it just took me out of my box that somebody would. I was like, yeah, of course. Everybody in here knows how to read. So she's like, I have a letter from my kid, and could you read it?
That's awesome.
And so I read it to her, and
you.
then she was like, and I can't write either.
Yeah.
So I wrote the letter back to her kid. Awesome. And then the next day, I had like a gazillion women.
Of course you did.
Come to me and was like, I hear you could read and write.
Yeah.
I was like, I was freaked out.
Yeah.
And then that's when I knew that was my purpose in there.
There you are.
I had a purpose.
Yeah.
You know, because you have to have a purpose when you're in there. Otherwise, you're
bored as hell.
You'd be bored and drowned.
That's right.
And I was only in there for 29 days, right?
Yeah.
I had to serve 30-day sentence. It was 29. I served 29 days.
Yeah, I'm sure that worked out great.
But those women were so kind and generous, Venice. You know what happened?
Amazing people.
So they found out that I had a severe dairy allergy.
Mm-hmm.
And they would leave Twizzlers.
I'm not surprised.
As payment for doing whatever.
Yep.
Well, it's against the law to. I mean, that breaks the rules.
Yeah,
but the fact that these women took their hard-earned
went to commissary
money, to commissary to get me some candy so they could say thank you.
Yep.
I was so moved by that.
Yeah.
Like it just changed me.
Yeah.
But I was stunned by the nature of these women couldn't read, but they had GED classes they had to take. So they had to go to the GED classes, but they couldn't read the materials. So that would get them thrown in the shoe.
Yep.
I just.
And what's shoe going to do? Shoe is going to make it worse, exacerbate mental health problems.
Oh my God.
Exacerbate all sorts of issues. And then what? Then you're going to learn to read?
So I was like, is there some remedial to help them read so they can get ready? And they were like, no.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh.
But you know, I'm struck by something you said, that it changed you. And this is one of the things that goes back to a core of what I'm talking about. You know, one of the ways that I frame my research is called a cell of one's own. Mm-hmm. Because I, as a white woman with privilege, I got to go to college and get a room of my own. You know, mm-hmm. I got to learn.
Me too.
I got to learn who I was. Many of us do, right? But many of us go to college and we get to learn who we are there and what are our strengths and what are the things we get to make mistakes and fix ourselves, do all these different things. But for traumatized, poor women of color, they don't have that opportunity. So really we're going to send them to prison, because a lot of the women that I talked to, they had that moment in prison and jail where they said, wow, this isn't who I want to be. I'm tired. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. I don't want to do this. This is my rock bottom. I had, I was face down in a park, in a muddy park with a police officer's shoe on my back. That's not the life I want for myself. I was high. I was this, that. That's not the life I want for myself. But really, as a cage, the place that we as a society want to use for our Black and brown sisters and brothers to be their moment, that makes no sense.
And I'll tell you one other thing. When I was at Danbury in the prison camp, which is different than the high-level camp, it felt like a college campus.
Yeah, some of them do. Bedford Hills is like that.
I was like, this feels like, I mean, I remember when I was in college in the, in the 80s. I was like, this is like college with like guards, right, and guns. But it was, you know, it
and
was
people
pastoral,
who can't read, and
with people who can't read.
Yeah.
I mean, but
well, you know why?
It had all the makings of what college. It felt like college.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, they have a captive audience. Why don't they?
Yes.
They have a captive audience. They could put things in place to make these women, to help these women's lives be better than when they walked in.
Yes.
Give them tools.
Pap smears, you know, treatment for all sorts of illnesses, substance abuse treatment, all these things. Again, I don't think people should be captive. So let me preface it with that. But if you are going to be in this situation where you have these people, I think about the work that the Camden Coalition for Healthcare Providers is doing down in Camden, New Jersey. Dr. Dawn Weiss that I worked with at the Women's Prison Association, they're doing incredible work that they're finding these people who use emergency rooms very, very, very often for their medical care, and who end up in the prison system and the jail system really very often. And you know what they're doing? They send teams of nurses to those people's homes, and they treat their, you know, what's going on with them. Instead of having them go to the emergency rooms, guess how much that costs taxpayers? Guess whether or not that works. You talk about wait times. You're sitting in an emergency room for how long? And you've been there 5 times that week. Really? No, it doesn't work. So the Camden Coalition has this incredible model where they're going out to these people and they're addressing their problems proactively. And then then it works for the people, it works for the community, it works for the taxpayers, it works for absolutely everybody. It works for the hospitals, it works for the jails, the prisons, you know, getting people out of that revolving door of these systems that don't work.
Wow. It was a pleasure talking to you. You have to come back. Seriously.
Absolutely.
You must come back.
I would love that.
Jeff will be back. He's recuperating, but he'll be back soon.
Yes, I know.
But you have to get back on our calendar.
I'd love that.
And come back, because I enjoyed this conversation. I need to stay connected to you.
Yes,
and
you
know, you're good friends with my dear love, Kia.
Yes.
So
Kia is a sister friend.
Oh, she is my love and my sorrow. So
yes, I know.
Thank you for today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening. And all the folks that listening, thank you so much for listening to Criminal Justice Insider with BABZ, RAWLS-IVY, and Jeff Grant, sponsored by the Community Foundation of Greater New Haven, now more than ever. And thanks, Andrew. We'll see you soon. All right. Goodbye.
Bye.